Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we'll be delving into the really dark side of the discourse, well, possibly, with Alex Garland's new movie Civil War, and then we'll be going back to the past in, as I'll explain later, a number of ways with Renegade Nell. But before all of that, Alistair, what else have you done?
So I've been watching a high-profile show on Netflix, which is Three Body Problem, which is based on, a very successful sci-fi novel that came out, the better part of 10 years ago. And obviously in the content arms race that we're experiencing right now, there's now a TV adaptation. So on Netflix. And I think this has been one of Netflix's bigger hits of the year, I would say. It's certainly been one of their better received shows that they put a sort of lot of emphasis on. They had that live action adaptation of The Last Airbender, which everyone panned, seemed to be pretty poorly received. But this is has been well received, and I would say it's pretty good. The original novel is set in China, and they've relocated it to the UK and sort of westernized the cast a bit. But they've still kept, I think, some of the best bits of the book. The book begins with a long section during the Cultural Revolution in China, which is actually one of the best bits of the book, and is sort of one of the best bits of the show as well. And they've kept that bit still in, it's set in China, but then they've kind of moved the present day sort of techno-thriller plot, moved that to the UK and focused on UK scientists rather than Chinese ones as the original novel does. But it's, other than that change, I think it's really entertaining. It captures some of my favourite bits of the book. And it's not an easy book to adapt because it's quite strange in some places, but they seem to have nailed that. So if you're on the fence about Three Body Problem, I can recommend that.
Yeah, no, it is on the list of things to watch. We seem to be in the middle of a bit of a sudden glut of interesting looking telly. It seems to all be landing in this sort of wave after wave at the moment. Like, I'm aware there's about 5 different things that are coming up in May as well. So I haven't got to Three Body Problem yet, but it does look and sound good.
Yeah. No, it's certainly worth watching. Yeah, good sort of, tense thriller, some good twists. They've got a very good cast as well. Leon Cunningham from Game of Thrones, the man who played Sam Tarly in Game of Thrones, whose name temporarily escapes me. Jonathan Pryce is in it. I feel they pulled out the stops a bit with this one. Got some names and got some, reasonable budget to make the weird effects bits look pretty good. So I think, Netflix are sort of betting on this being a hit. Seems to have worked out for them.
Since it's on Netflix, how is the general Netflix factor? Does it feel like a chopped up movie?
Not so much. I think partly because there's quite a lot of plot to get through, being based on a book. Yeah, it's only 8 episodes and it does zip along. I feel like back in the day when these sort of Netflix shows started, when you had like Luke Cage being like 13 episode seasons, those were kind of too long really for the amount of plot they had. I think that was our frequent criticism of them. But this feels like about the right amount of plot for like 8-hour-long episodes. I think also crucially, they draw on not just the first novel. They put quite a bit in. It's a trilogy of novels, I think. I've only read the first one, although I've been meaning to go and read the others. And there's stuff in the TV show that I don't remember at all from the book that I'm pretty sure they've done. They brought some stuff forward from the second book into the first one just so that there's more plot. Which means it doesn't get, drag like a lot of Netflix shows does. It does have the same ending as the book, which is one of the best scenes actually as well. So overall I think it's actually pretty well paced for a Netflix show.
And since you made it pretty clear that you have read the book, you just wanted to slip that in there. Mm-hmm. Does it compare well? Have they done justice to it?
I think so, yeah. My one criticism of how they've adapted it is that the actual Three Body Problem itself of the title is sort of glossed over quite quickly. Yeah, the book spends more time really kind of like elaborating it. I think maybe they felt that like this sort of the science behind that would be less interesting and we should get back to the kind of the thrillery aspects of it. I'm deliberately saying it's still about the plot because, if you've not seen it, maybe it's best just to go in open-minded. So you get very little Three Body Problem in Three Body Problem. But other than that, they've captured some of the sort of weird and strange bits of the book quite well. And some of the most impactful scenes are certainly delivered well. So I think if you're a fan of the book, then you should like this show.
And the fact they've moved it to England doesn't neuter it entirely or make it pointless.
I think it works. I suppose like a lot of adaptations, you kind of have to look at it on some level as a thing in its own right. In that, this kind of story they're trying to tell is like, I guess, a different story from the book. I mean, there's a lot more characters in the TV show, I guess, because there's been an 8 episode, each one an hour long. It's kind of, going off in different directions. You're following different characters in different combinations, doing different things. And I think some of those characters are brought forward, I think, from other books in the series and things like that. Because I do remember there being it being sort of more focused on the kind of the two main characters in the novel, though it's been a while since I read it. But yeah, I think they relocated to Britain and focused it on this group of friends, all of whom is tied in some way to the main plot. That kind of works as a decision. It gives it sort of this sense of everyone's connected and you're following this group of people as they go through this sort of strange otherworldly experience.
And the novel trilogy is actually finished, isn't it? They have actually got all the material there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that's the story. Yeah, although I think it goes over a long period of time. So yeah, I don't know if they do future seasons. There might be a time jump. Yeah, I think the plot is set over quite a long period of time. But there's a lot of material there. So I'm not going to go as far as and say this is aiming to be the next Game of Thrones. Although it does have 2 Game of Thrones cast members in it.
Yeah.
Especially, it's annoying me, I can't remember his name. The guy who plays Sam Tarly. He plays a very different character in this. Like a guy who's sort of a bit rude and cocksure and things like that. So yeah, they've got some Game of Thrones people in it. But I don't think there's, the world is as big and rich as Game of Thrones. And there aren't, 7, doorstop-sized books to draw on. But there's definitely enough material here, I think, to make a really good, 4 season, 8 episodes sci-fi thriller. So, and I hope they do make more of this because it seems to be been a hit, and it's nice to see a good adaptation, well received.
Well, I mean, I guess most Netflix shows seem to die around season 2 or 3. So I guess if it's a trilogy, then they might be able to do it in 3 seasons. So they might hope they've got a chance of actually getting there.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, obviously, a lot of Netflix shows get cancelled after their first season. As far as I'm aware, I haven't heard anything about this definitely being renewed. I noticed they announced that they've renewed the Fallout TV show on Amazon Prime just after it came out. So sometimes they just announce these things straight off the bat. But I think, as we said in a previous episode, one of the big IP content mines that is sort of relatively untapped is sci-fi novels, sci-fi fantasy novels. They might feel they've got themselves a good piece of IP here. It's recent, it's popular. I think it's popular in China as well, which obviously is, an emerging market and place where I'm sure Netflix is trying to shop subscriptions. I feel that this seems like a good bet for Netflix, partly because it's actually good TV.
Well, yeah, it's nice to hear it's actually good. It feels like it's been a bit of a fallow period for Netflix. I'm sure I could name the last Netflix show that was actually successful, but it might take me a minute.
The last Netflix thing that seemed to be everyone was watching and talking about was the
Wednesday?
Sandman. Yeah, or the Sandman adaptation.
Wednesday or the Sandman? Yeah, I can't remember what came first. But
yeah.
I think Wednesday might be the more recent one.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it does feel like Netflix has been a bit out of the old zeitgeist. So yes, well done, guys, I guess. This seems to have got at least a bit more chat.
Yeah, and it was largely positive chat. There was quite a bit of chat about The Last Airbender. In the sort of geeky circles I move in, that cartoon series has quite a lot of cultural cachet. And it is a great, the original, I think, Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network cartoon series of The Last Airbender is actually really good and definitely worth watching. But everyone seems to say this, although I must say I haven't seen it, this Netflix adaptation is bad. So it's one thing to be the thing that everyone's talking about, but saying that your product is shit is probably not what they had in mind. But this is everyone's talking about it, and I've not met anyone who doesn't like it. And I've met also a few people who don't really certainly don't read sci-fi and don't watch a lot of it, but saying this is good. This is good.
Okay, it will go on the list. I'll see if I can watch it in time for my annual top 10.
Cool. Yep. So I've been diving into Netflix. Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, also watched a TV show. Not my most up-to-date bit of viewing, though. Not as up to the moment as you. I watched the last season of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, the police sitcom from, I think, NBC in America, starring Andy Samberg and the sadly now departed Andre Braugher, which aired, I think, around 2021. It aired on Channel 4. The Channel 4 on-demand service, as those of you who live in Britain will know, is absolutely awful. So if you don't watch things within 30 days, they get deleted and they don't leave the whole season up at the same time, and it's just a nightmare. So I just didn't get round to watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine on that, so I had to wait till it came up on Netflix, which it finally has. So yeah, this is the last season. At this point, as with the last season of a lot of long-running hangout sitcoms, it's a bit of a victory lap. You know the characters, you kind of know the jokes. It's just a chance to spend a bit more time with the guys. There's a little bit of a more serious undercurrent to this one, just because Brooklyn Nine-Nine got a bit of stick, or at least a bit of heavy focus during the Black Lives Matter discussions in 2020 around the death of George Floyd. There was a lot of discussion about sitcoms that portray the cops as friendly, lovable chaps, and you can sort of see them wrestling with it a bit. There's a lot more storylines about policemen quitting the force because they just increasingly aren't convinced they're doing good. The main villain, or at least, yeah, I guess villain, certainly the main antagonist for this season, is one of the senior people in the policemen's union, played by Dr. Cox from Scrubs. It's nice to see him again.
That's a good bit of casting.
Yeah. Playing this sort of aging blowhard whose sole goal in life is to prevent policemen from being made accountable for what they do. Which, of course, culminates in a bit where the main character, Jake Peralta, does something incredibly stupid and retrospectively that looks incredibly bad. The union guy turns up to try and get him off, and Jake Peralta must, sort of reject his help because it's all just so immoral. So yeah, there's a bit of that. There's a bit of sort of attempting to reckon with the real life problems with American police departments, and also do some matey jokes, which is occasionally a bit of a total shift, I think. But it does ultimately just about work. I think really they box off a lot of the serious stuff in the front end of the season and then save the last few episodes, it's only 10 episodes, to do sort of the last few matey hangout times with our good friends. And it just about works. The jokes definitely feel a bit used up, and it's definitely time for it to end, but it was a nice viewing experience.
So overall it was good, but the sort of golden era of the show was in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of true of most sitcoms that get to season 8. I mean, it's better than some. It's still actually funny. The jokes are still actually decent. The characters have got a nice, good enough chemistry that it's just fun to watch them. But yeah, they don't really have much new to say, apart from a little bit of this sort of serious topical stuff.
Yeah, it does sound like that's a good way to engage with the cultural debates that have been had at the time, and also bring those into the show without, changing it too much or making it a didactic political show. Because yeah, that sounds like, a good way to reflect those, especially the values. I feel even though Brooklyn Nine-Nine's a show about cops, its viewership seems to be of the sort of liberal lefty persuasion, or at least in this country. So I guess they feel like they have to address these issues, partly for their audience, and probably partly because it's something the writers care about.
Yeah, there's a lot of, Brooklyn Nine-Nine has, at least once or twice per season, normally had a sort of, I don't know, I guess you call it an issue episode, where one of the main characters' race becomes an issue, or one of the main characters comes out as bisexual, that sort of thing. They clearly do care about these issues, so they clearly weren't just going to quietly ignore the whole Black Lives Matter thing. And yeah, there's maybe one episode where it slightly skims the line between becoming overly, as you say, didactic and just not being very much fun. But for the most part, they just about make it work. Having Dr. Cox there certainly helps.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think focusing on the policemen's union is probably the best way to do it, because you need to keep, I guess, the story focused within the police department, because that's what it's a show about. If they started to expand it to bring in characters who are in a sort of, a pressure group, activists from outside the police department, then you're just kind of shifting the focus of the show to new characters, which doesn't tend to work very well. Whereas I guess by bringing in police unions, you'll still keep it focused on the police department, but bringing in these issues. And also you're highlighting an important aspect of the debate about policing in America, which is how resistant to change policing unions are. I think Barack Obama tried to force through some changes and just got totally gridlocked by police unions. It is a big deal, especially in America.
Yeah, I mean, I think the show leans back from having too much of and then the characters solve all the problems. I think it's sort of, in the end, has to settle for just, using its platform as a fun little comedy to also tell you, and by the way, these problems also exist, which I think is the most they can realistically do.
I think so. And directing people's attention toward the policing unions actually is a way to tell people, like, this is where pressure needs to be applied, which is actually an important point to make for a show that is not, it's not the West Wing. It is mainly a hangout show.
Yes, it's very, very silly. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I don't think, stands up to that much serious analysis in a lot of ways, but it does contain a lot of episodes where kind of the joke is that the policemen are acting like silly little children while investigating a murder. How well equipped it is to make deadly serious points sort of comes and goes, but yeah, they clearly tried here. It's clearly something they care about and want to do. Yeah,
and it was sad that they lost a prominent cast member who was actually someone with a long CV, been around for a while. Did he complete all his scenes, or did they do a sort of, John Spencer West Wing bit when they had to sort of edit around?
I mean, this is because it's taken me about 2 years to watch this. He has passed since the ending of the show. He's in the entire show up to the end.
Oh, right, sorry. But yeah, it's still sad, yeah. And I guess it seems like at least his career's ended on a high with, by having a main role in a very popular show.
Yeah, he was very, very popular in this as Captain Holt, and he was also one of the best things in it, so fair enough. And yeah, I hope he enjoyed the adultation of the fan base for the last decade or so.
Yeah, and Andy Samberg is someone who's incredibly funny.
Yeah, no, he's very good. There was possibly almost too much Andy Samberg in the first season or so of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but like a lot of sitcoms, it evens out. It became a bit more of a balanced ensemble piece by about season 2, and yeah, as I say, it maybe at this point the jokes have flamed out a bit, but seasons say 2 to 5 or so of Brooklyn Nine-Nine are incredibly good. As recent American sitcoms go, they're probably among the best ones.
Yeah, and this is also like a network sitcom where they make more episodes. It's not like a streaming service thing, is it?
Yeah, I mean, the season lengths have drifted steadily downwards as the show has gone on, but yeah, there's definitely for the first few years they are on the full 22 episode season. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's in some ways it feels like, again, I think we say that a lot. Maybe things have come around, that like it feels quite like an older show, like a 90s show. It's a network show based in like kind of one location, workplace, core group of characters. It feels very much like your kind of traditional meat and potatoes sitcom.
I mean, I've seen a lot of like nostalgia for that sort of show, to be honest. I've seen a lot of, bring back the filler episode chats on Twitter, a lot of the idea that, what we want is to feel like we're just spending day in, day out time with these characters doing more routine stuff rather than only doing their one big story. Hear a lot of people increasingly saying they kind of miss that, If you look at the data on streaming services and what's most popular, it's often shows from 20 years ago because you actually get that sort of extended hangout vibe.
Yeah, and it's something, we can, they're usually big cultural icons people can relate to, Friends and things like that.
Friends, Buffy, The Office, all that, yeah.
Yeah, also, there are shows you can just kind of pick up and put down, like, if you haven't watched the show in, like, 4 or 5 months, you don't have to be like, who's this guy, what's their deal, how does that relate to the main plot, because each episode's just got the same premise in essence, and you can watch them in any order. If you want to go back to them, you don't have to be like, where in the arc do I want to go, and you can just be like, oh, this episode's funny, let's watch that.
Yeah, I mean, for sitcoms, certainly. I mean, you can go back and forth on whether the death of the 22 episode season has been good for drama shows. Some manage it better than others, but I think definitely sitcoms probably did benefit for having more episodes, especially these sort of American ones.
I feel they also benefited from having this thing when it sort of like resets at the end of every episode. Yeah, there's like some character progression and things like that. Occasionally there's a big episode, someone gets married, someone, a couple breaks up or whatever. But basically each episode resets the premise to the state it was at the beginning of the episode, so you can watch them in any order, in isolation and with any time length between them.
Yeah, I feel like I was talking about this in relation to something else on this podcast. It's the sort of Dan Harmon story circle thing. A character makes a change, discovers the consequences of that change, and then goes back to the status quo, experiencing, feeling like they've experienced some degree of character growth, but not enough to change the show.
Yeah, exactly. King of the Hill, I think, absolutely nails this. Almost every episode of King of the Hill has some similar structure, which is Bobby gets involved in something, Hank finds it embarrassing and strange. At the end, he learns to basically, he doesn't need to be so self-conscious, and he gets over it, and then there's a happy ending, and it kind of basically repeats over and over and over. And there's a few variations on it, but that's basically the show. But they managed to nail it for about 11 seasons, so it can be done well.
So yeah, only 8 seasons of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but yeah, it's pretty decent. As I say, certainly it's probably one of the better American sitcoms I've watched in the last few years. I'm struggling now to think of another one.
Respectable that it's still good after 8 seasons, because a lot of shows do go off the boil.
Yeah, the fact that it still kept up basic standards of comedy after 8 years is impressive. So yes, it probably was time for it to go, but it will still on some level be missed. Maybe one day I'll go back and watch it again.
Next, this episode, we will be discussing Civil War, a new war movie directed by Alex Garland, set during a contemporary American Civil War, where the Western forces of Texas and California have seceded from the Union, and the state of Florida has also seceded from the Union to form its own state. The film follows Lee Smith, played by Kirsten Dunst, a famous war photographer who leads a plucky group of war correspondents from New York down to Washington, D.C. to cover the front line of the war as the Western forces draw in on the capital with the aim of killing the president. We saw this film in the cinema recently. Nick, what did you think of it?
Strange movie, this. It's an alright enough film about sort of the horrors of war and war journalism, set against this sort of fictional Civil War backdrop that mostly just serves as a combination of sort of clickbait talking points and a pretext for these sort of disturbing war in modern society images, which are very well done. They benefit here from Alex Garland being an incredibly good director of like striking and occasionally shocking or disturbing visuals. It's very good stuff for a horrors of war movie, and the fact that it's happening on the streets of a sort of modern Western society, as someone who lives in such a society, is pretty freaky. So yeah, if you want a movie that has sort of a few good scenes that will individually freak you out, then that does work well, and the message about the horrors of being a journalist covering this stuff also come across. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't feel fully immersed in it, possibly because the characters feel a bit superficial. They feel a bit like tropes. There's a sort of the young, slightly naive kid. There's the grizzled veteran, the wise old man, and then the other character played by Wagner Moura, who I think honestly gets a lot of the more interesting material. Who's this sort of 30-ish guy who seems a bit of a sort of adrenaline junkie, but is sort of dawning on him in quite a traumatic way how horrible it all is. He has some interesting moments, but a lot of the characters do feel a bit simplistic and tropey, and as a result, I found it hard to love this movie. But it is a very nicely made movie that does make its points that yes, a modern US Civil War would be bad.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I feel that this film has got great technical execution. It's tense, it's dramatic. There's a few scenes in particular that are very tense, which I'm sure we'll come to. And it's got a real sense of style. Yeah, Alex Garland has like a good visual eye, and he's good for like slightly psychedelic sequence as well, and sort of brings in this sort of sense of like the weird into his filmmaking quite well. I mean, we discussed Men on this podcast, which is, a horror movie. It's turning the weird up a lot more, but there's various sort of bits about the Kirsten Dunst character has these sort of trauma dreams about previous conflicts that are like quite sort of vividly done. There's a interesting motif, which is because two of the main characters are photographers. Whenever they take a picture, you kind of see the picture just flash on screen, and it really looks like something from, the New York Times color supplement or something like that. These kind of photojournalist stories that they do with these kind of high quality images. It's got a good eye for photography as well as for filmmaking. That really works. And yeah, there's been a lot of good sense of style running through his previous films, from Ex Machina. Even Debs, I thought, had a quite nice style to it. But I'm not really sure what this film's trying to say, is my kind of big point in it, which is that as you say, it's kind of saying like, yeah, it'd be bad if we just started killing each other in the streets. But it's very much dancing around like what causes the Civil War, in that it's not really revealed. And the main group, these Western forces, is Texas and California ceding from the Union, deliberately choosing the most right-wing and probably the most left-wing states, so they can't be pointing at one side or the other to say this side's responsible for a civil war. It's kind of like trying to choose the way that you could have an American Civil War with it saying the least about contemporary American politics, apart from a vague point that ideology is divisive, and it's like, divisive politics is tearing people apart. I don't really, I feel that like this film either doesn't have a message about contemporary American politics, or its message is basically like sensible moderation is best, everyone else is dangerous, which doesn't seem to work.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of chat about that, yeah, about whether this film is both sidesing current political polarisation. I think it verges on no sidesism myself. I think it basically just doesn't particularly care or want to comment about that. It's mostly just a film about the horrors of war, and the fact that it takes place in a contemporary American Civil War is basically just an excuse for some memorable marketing images and some cool sort of / horrifying sequences. I'm not convinced it has that much to say about the notion of a current American Civil War, apart from, as I said, it would be bad if it happened for some reason.
Yeah, that's very much the thing about it, which kind of, I felt, left me possibly feeling, I don't know, almost like a bit hollow afterwards, or a bit, that the film was lacking something. Like, for a film that's this well executed, I feel it needs to have something to say. I do feel that some of these criticisms, I'm holding the film to quite a high standard. There are a lot of things we've reviewed in this podcast when we've said that was an entertaining thriller, full marks, good job, more please. And this is an entertaining thriller. It's probably more entertaining than some. There were several bits when I properly like jumped in my seat and went, oh shit, like something took me by surprise. It's just like a sniper shot coming out of nowhere when they're just driving along and things like that. So yeah, it is, well made, and I feel that maybe we're holding this film to a higher standard than other stuff. But like when you make a film called Civil War, going through the kind of period in politics that we have right now, a film full of like images of like soldiers fighting on the Lincoln Memorial and ending with soldiers storming into the White House to kill the president. I kind of feel that a film with those kind of images should have something more to say, even if it was something I disagreed with more. I probably would appreciate that more. Obviously, I feel there's only one side in America that's driving the country towards a civil war. It's the right and the far right, and I guess I want a film that points the finger at them, but in the absence of that, I'd like the film that has something more to say.
I mean, I'm not sure I'd entirely give the film even the credit that it's a entirely slick and competent if you ignore the fact that it has nothing to say about current politics, but yeah, I'll get to that. Well, I kind of already have, but anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think it's annoying because in some ways it's We have covered media before. I'm trying to think of the obvious comparative example. I guess it might be something like The Handmaid's Tale, which did kind of feel like it was rising to the moment to some degree. And The Handmaid's Tale TV show trailed off quite badly after season 1, but it did at least still feel like it was, of the moment and saying something. Whereas this feels like it kind of wants to be of the moment for marketing purposes or for eye-catching purposes. I mean, yeah, but doesn't really have much to say beyond that.
Yeah, which is, it's on some level disappointing, but also on some level maybe it's unfair. I guess I give it, I don't know, I give the film points for like creating these like very striking images, of like, war in, America, white picket fences and all that, very kind of like classic Americana with fighting going on in them. In fact, some of the most interesting bits about the film is the amount of people who just ignore the war, and pretend it's not happening even though it's going on in their country, which is possibly the bit where the film has something to say. The amount of people who are kind of like just want to bury their head in the sands as things get worse, things get more divided. There's that element to it.
Yeah, and as you say, a lot of the filler pacing stuff is actually quite good. Like, as you say, there were several bits I sort of had a big holy shit moment and jumped out of my seat in the cinema because, there'd been a sudden sniper shot or someone had suddenly done something appalling. Yeah, there's various bits with, like, pits full of bodies and bodies hanging from car washes and stuff and other quite horrible images. Like, it's not shallow edgelord shit. There is a genuine element to evoke the horrors of war within the setting. The part where I think it slightly falls down on competence is that I found the characters, as I say, a bit not much. Most of them? I don't know. Maybe I'm just being too demanding. Maybe I just don't watch enough fillers, and in the average filler, as long as the character is played by a decent actor, it doesn't matter if they have almost no depth or personality. But I did find that most of the characters, for all that Kirsten Dunst did do some decent acting, didn't seem to have much to them, and had dialogue which sounded a little bit generic in first draft.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on the characterization. Certainly, I think Kirsten Dunst is doing good work with what she's been given. These aren't brilliant characters, and also it's partly I feel that like I wanted more from this film. Alex Garland's good at characterization. I thought Men, for example, like especially the main characters in that were like kind of better done than here. They seemed more like real people rather than less like sort of generics. You got the grizzled, I've seen a lot of shit war photographer. Yeah, as you said, old wise man. There's this plot line when they get basically a kid sort of student photographer comes with them. It's a little contrived. How they end up, these veteran correspondents doing something incredibly dangerous, how they just end up with a sort of young war photographer tagging along.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in Alex Garland's filmography, but this is the first time he's done one of these like high scale action films, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure it's a lot to take on if you've not done it before. But yeah, it did feel like some of the character stuff got a bit neglected, even if he did do a very good job of some of the action sequences and action visuals.
Yeah, I felt that like, you're right. The characters could have had a bit more weight to them, just being a bit more, it's just kind of fairly generic characters for, in a war movie. They come across as people and likable, but it's going back to what I was saying before. I kind of wanted a bit more. I wanted some more insight into, this character, this Kirsten Dunst character she's seen a lot. She's got one bit when she's basically says like, I took all these pictures from wars around the world, and she's clearly quite traumatized by it. She was sending this message back to America, don't do this. And that's kind of like her one serious bit, and she sort of takes on this younger photographer, and she doesn't, at any point it's basically like, going around the world watching people do the worst things to each other is really like bad for you, your mental health, things like that. Maybe don't do this as a career. None of that is really addressed. Even like the trauma dreams bit are kind of in it at the beginning and then sort of disappear.
Yeah, like I don't know if this is imagined as like an ode to the bravery and sacrifice of war journalism, but to be honest, when I watched this, I mostly thought, wow, that looks like the worst job in the world. It looks like you really get the worst of all possible angles there. You're glad I didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some levels they get across the elements of it. I read Maria Colvin's collection of her war correspondence after she died, about 10 years ago. And I think it gets across some of the things about war journalists. That some of them are, just like adrenaline junkies. Some of them are just obsessed with like technical details, like, what kind of tank is that? What kind of like, and the better ones are the ones who find human stories. It has something to say about how journalists just document people. It's up to politicians and the people to react to the documentary stuff. They don't save lives. They don't even pass judgment. They just record. So it's got some of those sort of elements to it as well. But then that's sort of, I don't know, it's kind of a bit journalism school 101, philosophy of journalism. There's not really a lot of that. Plus, also, maybe getting to spoilers territory, the Kirsten Dunst character seems to have a big breakdown at the end for seemingly no reason, and I wasn't exactly sure why that happened.
Yeah, that was Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't sure if that was just me being an inhuman robot, but I was a bit kind of waiting for a bit more insight into exactly what triggered that. I didn't think they'd really built her breaking enough for it to finally happen. I mean, maybe as I say, I'm just being a monster. Like, she had just seen 2 people she knows die. Spoilers. In fact, 3 people she knows die. Not a great time for Kirsten Dunst, but it still didn't entirely feel like they'd earned her suddenly just breaking down completely.
I mean, even if it was basically like it finally brought home that like they're in the capital and like they're just like laying waste to the whole thing and like destroying the heart of America. But like, you know, it needs at least a line of dialogue to be that, rather than just have her just stop in the middle of like a main action scene and start crying.
Well, yeah, especially because that character hadn't really shown any sign of being that attached to that sort of thing. You know, America and the homeland, her main characterization point so far had been the horrors of war. I have seen the horrors of war, and it saddens me.
Yeah, but also like she goes from basically being like extreme violence is water off a duck's back to me because that's the sort of person I am after doing this job for so long, to basically being like, oh, the humanity. And it's like, yeah, some intermediate steps are needed. So yeah, I mean, yeah, the characterization bit all over the shop.
Yeah, as I say, I liked the lead male character played by Wagner Moura. I thought had actually a decent enough journey. For some reason, that character worked for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't really have, I guess, a huge payoff at the end, but he did have a breakdown moment, which for some reason I did feel.
Yeah, I think that because it was linked to the aforementioned scene when quite a few of the named characters in the film die. That's probably the best bit of the film. Yeah, when they run across a kind of gun-toting, possibly militia member, possibly soldier.
Jesse Plemons, isn't it?
Yeah, he's great. He does menacing and just disturbed really, really well. He's probably standout performance of the film for that one scene. And he's just, yeah, like a psycho with a gun shooting people. And it is just really, really tense, really disturbing. And the other thing what I liked about it, and this film gets across well actually, and this scene in particular, how one person with a gun is just very, very dangerous. Especially if they're just going to shoot people. And, you know, there's 5 of them, I think, you know, and there's one guy with a gun. I think he's got one friend with him, but they're like totally at his mercy. And there are films out there, and you know, not films that are like, you know, fantasy sci-fi films. There are plenty of like action films when an unarmed main character can, you know, disarm through skills or whatever several armed opponents. And, you know, it can make a thrilling scene. The sort of thing that happens in a Mission Impossible movie, for example. And you know, that's not realistic. And this film is realistic in that sense that, yeah, one person with a gun can terrorize and has total power over even a large group of unarmed people. And it just really shows that, like, yeah, straightforward how dangerous people with guns are, especially when you shoot people. And it is really harrowing. So they see that bit is really good. So why couldn't the whole film be like that?
I mean, that for me comes under the sort of horrors of war imagery. Like the Jesse Plemons character, I mean, he absolutely nails the brief, but his brief is not to be a three-dimensional character with emotions, feelings, and a backstory. His job is to be a horrifying element, and he's incredibly good in it. But yeah, it's a moment that absolutely nails the vibes. There's a lot of good vibes in the sense that they are horrible and harrowing in this film. Yeah, the part I was criticising was the like sustained characterisation of the protagonists. But yeah, Jesse Plemons is just one of the horrible war things in this film, but does work.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. Yeah, and that bit actually is also when it gets close to having something political to say, in that he starts killing people who aren't Americans. Yeah, it's almost like he strikes me as a member of a right-wing militia because he's very attached to, America and being the right kind of Americans. And he likes the main character because like her family's from like Colorado, and one of the other characters, their family's from like Montana or something, you know, like that's like America. The bit with the film has the most to say, and also, yeah, again, it also does the sort of horrors of war thing quite well.
Well, that scene, to be fair, the fact that we don't know the character that well almost is what makes it work, because it's just, as you say, the fact that he's got this gun and he's asking these questions just leaves you with this horrible sort of, oh god, what's he going to do when he hears that? And it's all pretty grim.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it does do the kind of like war in America beat really well. So yeah, devastation, destruction. You know, on some level, I guess, maybe I hope this helps people connect with the idea that like how bad it is for these, you know, places on the other side of the world that get laid to waste by wars recently, from Syria to Ukraine, now to Gaza. You know, maybe will bring it home to an American audience that, like, you know, how terrible this destruction is when they see it. Like, this is what it looks like when people are like blowing up the Lincoln Memorial and storming the White House.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, I think if there is a point or an actual political thing to be gained from this film, that's probably it, to be honest.
Yeah. That's the message, like, yeah. And maybe do think about when you're sending weapons to the other side of the world or taking sides in these civil wars, in conflicts in different countries, things like that, like, at the heart of all this is just utter destruction and death of civilians. So, that is kind of what should be prevented and should be like held up as a value that, we shouldn't kill people and we shouldn't let whole civilizations descend into just kind of like destruction and violence, because when it's white picket fences and the White House, things like that, it's too horrible to look at. So that should apply to everyone, not just Americans. Finally, this episode, we will be discussing Renegade Nell. When Nell returns to her family home in Tottenham in 18th century England, she discovers her father and sisters tormented by a bully, son of a local magistrate. When this bully attacks her family's tavern, Nell discovers she has supernatural speed and strength thanks to the intervention of a fairy called Billy Blind. This unleashes a series of events that leads to Nell's father and the magistrate being killed, Nell being blamed, which leads to her taking her sisters on the road to become a highwaywoman while searching to clear her name. Although dark forces are stirring at the heart of the British government, Nell might have been given these magical gifts for a reason. We've seen the complete first season of this show on Disney+. Nick, what do you think of it?
Well, for those of you who remember the dim and distant past of the late 2000s, early 2010s, there was an era after Doctor Who came back and achieved a decent level of success with the sort of David Tennant stuff, I think, that a lot of the British TV channels started trying to make their own sort of soft sci-fi fantasy shows, like Merlin, Being Human, Misfits. And maybe Disney figured, but with Doctor Who coming back and making another big push for a mass audience, again with David Tennant, it might be time for another try at that sort of thing, because Renegade Nell is basically another run at that. I used to watch this sort of thing a lot in my sort of TV reviewer days back in the 2010s, and I've seen much worse. It's a decent example of that sort of show. It's got the necessary charismatic lead, it's got a sort of accessible, interesting but not too complicated fantasy gimmick, it's got this sort of fun swashbuckling vibe that the whole family can hopefully get down with. Personally, I was hoping for a bit more swashbuckling. I think it doesn't need to go full Panto or alternatively full Merlin, but it could maybe have stood to be a bit more fun, have a bit more sort of action swashbuckling. It seemed like I was sometimes waiting quite a long time between the sort of fun action sequences, but yeah, it's entertaining enough. It's, as I say, it's a decent version of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I found this to be very entertaining. Yeah, it's exciting, it's fast-paced, it's got a good sense of humour, but yeah, it's not, overly funny to detract from the drama, but it's got, a good sense of humour running through it. I think a lot of it is sold on the kind of natural appeal and charm of Louisa Harland, who, most people know from Derry Girls, playing Orla. She's, just very, very good, very talented. I've seen her on the stage in London actually twice in the last year. First at the National Theatre in Dancing at Lufthansa, and more recently in Ulster American at the Riverside Studios. And she's brilliant. She's great on stage, amazing performances, and she's great here. So if you want kind of, Louisa Harland entertaining you, playing a very likeable, lovable character, sort of plucky outlaw, someone, who's, in this to get revenge and look after their younger family, the two younger siblings, then it's got all the sort of elements of a very sort of like, charming adventure show. So I can certainly recommend this.
Yes, listeners, he's been to the theatre and he's read a book.
But
they sounds mad.
Get the clever boy points this.
But yes. Yes, Louisa Harland is very good in this. She's very charismatic in a way, which she clearly was in Derry Girls, to steal whole scenes with a couple of sort of weird lines. But it's deployed a bit more sort of upfront aggressively here as this sort of lovable, adventurous highwaywoman hero who is sort of one of these characters who is not seeking attention, but almost becomes more likeable and more, attractive almost from the way she isn't looking for the attention. There's some nice moments of whimsy. The whole cast are quite likeable. As you say, there's a lot of good sort of fun moments. The villains are also pretty decent. I still found myself occasionally yearning for more funny jokes or more action scenes, but the characters are all very likeable and you do sort of care what happens from scene to scene, which does keep you going. And it does go in some interesting and odd directions. Like, although Louisa Harland's character, the title character, Nell, is a hero, she also occasionally just goes off on these sort of possibly slightly misdirected little revenge quests, like when she decides to smash up the printing press for printing bad things about her. And it at least keeps the show moving in different ways.
Yeah, like each episode had a kind of like thing they were trying to achieve. I mean, there's like the first one sort of is just like sets everything up. And then there's one when she's trying to break this other highwayman that she meets out of prison. There's the one when she's trying to like break the presses. There's, each one's kind of got its own kind of bit of plot. Despite the fact it's quite an arc plot driven show, and it's weird. It starts out with this story, about it's a woman, her family. They're all kind of pluckable, love, really nice, regular people, and they're kind of being terrified by this local rich guy. And then they end up going on the run. And I kind of thought this was one of those sort of things that was going to like set something in motion and then not kind of really be come back to. Kind of like, how in like something like Due South, they never really revisit the initial murder that gets the Canadian guy down to Chicago. And it's just like kind of very much to set the drama in motion. But then they do loop back to the plot line of this, the bully character, and especially his sister, and that kind of grows into this whole thing about a conspiracy of Jacobites trying to overthrow the Queen. So it kind of, it starts as this story about one character kind of taking their family on the road to have adventures, and ends up being this big political drama and also kind of fantasy show when involving dark sorcerers and all the like. So it's quite a lot in this show for something that kind of on paper looks like fantasy adventure show.
Well, yeah, I think that's what makes it feel slightly more nuanced than, say, Merlin, which was very much a fairly straightforward show about Merlin trying to hide his secret identity and fighting the monster of the week. This show does have this sort of ongoing background of political drama, the villains sort of jockeying for power and manipulating these two sort of sub-villains. And yeah, there's a lot of nuance there. Part of me always feels there's a bit too much going on sometimes. Like there's a moment in the finale where I think it was, although Louisa Harland does do a lot to sell it just on acting, I think I would have felt the emotion more if I'd felt the bond between these two characters when one of them might have to sort of sacrifice themselves. Might just be me.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the big emotional endpoint for the show. Yeah, Louisa Harland nails the performance of that scene, and it's the kind of thing you need, like something like a character to make a sacrifice or like a big emotional decision to do something difficult at the end in order to resolve the plot, or else there's no kind of sense of tension.
I thought it did work from a plot perspective. I just didn't feel like I'd spent enough time with those two characters specifically for it to fully work, possibly because one of those characters was a bit of a special effect and was maybe quite expensive to put on screen. I don't know, but still.
Yeah, that's one of those things. But I guess they needed a way to raise the emotional stakes, which I did feel that did, partly because Nell gets these powers and then she kind of basically like beats up everyone she encounters. I think it's in the third episode when the Dark Sorcerer, played by Adrian Lester, who's I thought very, very good in this, as the villain. He does good villain. Yeah, he summons a sort of spirit kind of night thing from under the ground, and at first I thought like, oh, there's a real sense of peril because now we've got a supernatural enemy. But then Nell kind of relatively easily beats up this spirit night creature thing and saves everyone. And the one thing I did feel the show is that like, what is the limit to sort of Nell's abilities? Like, because she just seems to beat up everything, which kind of makes her Superman, borderline invulnerable. I mean, there's a tense bit I think in the third last episode when a villain kidnaps Nell's younger sister, and that's actually quite tense when like a regular person's threatened. I guess that's the same as Superman, you end up with Lois Lane getting kidnapped by someone or whatever, because that's...
A lot of times.
Yeah, but I did feel that, like, you've introduced this kind of fantasy world, like, there's more than just one person with magical powers. There's a whole kind of world to it, and there doesn't seem to be much kind of, like, layering of the abilities. Maybe that's just a more point about how to do fantasy rather than, I guess, necessarily how to do like an adventure drama show. But some bits did maybe lack peril that could have had more peril to them.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because the way Nell fights is the sort of thing you've seen a lot on shows like Buffy or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or various sort of modern genre shows featuring someone with like enhanced fighty powers, but seems like the sort of thing you see a bit less on this sort of period fantasy. Like, I don't remember Merlin doing like martial arts or smacking people around and kicking them. It was unique, certainly. It was in some ways quite odd to watch, but I'm not sure that's a criticism. But as you say, it did perhaps lead to some slight limitations of what they can really do when a big bad turns up, because somehow Nell's got to punch it to death.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this show, I think, as you probably say, owes as much to Buffy as it does to maybe like Doctor Who, something like that, in that, yeah, it's a show about a kick-ass young woman protecting her friends or close family from, evil magic people. So yeah, I guess there is that element to it. And they've got Disney money, which helps. There's quite a lot of extras. There's quite a lot of location shooting. There's quite a lot of, different locations. There's that one 16th century hall that they seem to film all these British shows at. It was used in Hannah. It was used in something else I watched recently, but yeah, they've got that location.
And it's a period drama, which I gather makes it quite expensive in itself.
Yeah, costumes and things like that. They've got a good cast as well. We mentioned Louisa Harland. Adrian Lester does a great villain.
Yeah, it's a reliable selection of British actors you kind of recognise. There's Nick Mohammed as Billy Blank. He's been in Ted Lasso recently. Art Malik shows up for a couple of episodes.
Yeah, Mark Heap plays...
he was good, yeah.
Yeah, he was good as the newspaper proprietor. And I thought, some of the core cast as well. Alice Kemberberg as the sort of one of the villains. She was very good and menacing, yeah. Bo Bragson as Nell's younger sister, and even the kid was pretty good. So yeah, they kind of all nailed their parts. Well cast across the board. Also, speaking of just like Disney throwing money at it, Nick Cave writing a song for the end credits of the last episode, like an original song about Renegade Nell. I thought that was an interesting choice. I don't know how much that cost for about a minute of song. But yeah, Nick Cave, there we go. He did a song for this.
Yeah, I did think that was odd. Yeah, I got to the end of the last episode and Nick Cave sang this little song at Renegade Nell, and I was sort of that's quite cute, but why wasn't that in every episode? If you could bother to produce that.
Yeah, exactly. With all the why wasn't it like the theme? Because I don't think. I mean, I was listening to it again, thinking like, wow, they've hired some session musician and he's really nailed the brief of a song that sounds like Nick Cave, but for this show. And then the credits come by, it's like, oh wow, it's actual Nick Cave. Interesting choices there, but it was good.
Oh yeah, it was fun. It was good. I was surprised I didn't hear it till the credits of the final episode, seconds before Disney Plus came up, saying, "Okay, well that was good. Do you want to watch something else?"
Yeah, do you want to watch The Artful Dodger?
Yeah, that's what I got as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I could see the connection.
Yeah.
I suppose they could have just pointed me straight to Merlin, but
I know there's been this sort of wave of higher profile or higher budget, probably should say, like British streaming shows. I guess as kind of they got their hands on Apple or Disney money or Amazon money. There was that Nick Frost, Simon Pegg show that had like everyone from like Julian Barrett through to what's his face from Clockwork Orange, Malcolm McDowell. I guess like a bit of Disney money buys a lot of well-known British actors probably. It feels like a bigger, grander thing than the BBC does. Especially as if the BBC was to spend this much money on a show, with, say, Nick Mohammed, Adrian Lester and Louisa Harland in it, they will probably spend it on like a big, famous adaptation of a British literary, classic or, a remake of a big British show. Like something that would be kind of feel like it's got to appeal to the broadest range of people as possible if we're going to spend this money on it. They wouldn't make like a fantasy show because... Even in this day and age, post Game of Thrones, post Harry Potter, post Lord of the Rings, sci-fi fantasy is still considered a bit of the geeks ghetto. But yeah, Disney were basically like, I guess partly because it's an online streaming thing, maybe they realise this stuff appeals to a broad range of people, or maybe it's just because they've got absolutely shed loads of money. It's like, yep, big cast, big expensive cast, lots of locations for your fantasy show. Here you go, loads of money.
Well, as I say, there was a period when they were doing this sort of thing a lot, so I guess maybe they figured, if they're doing this, as you say, this crop of British streaming shows, now's the time to give it another go. Maybe a lot of people are watching Merlin, or maybe it is just because they've also got Doctor Who. I don't know.
I think the Doctor Who connection is probably part of it. And also people are now becoming more open-minded in what they watch, what they read as well, and things like that. Yeah, there's more diversity, in people that are less restrictions to genres, even though possibly this hasn't filtered through to the executives who run things or the people who hand out big awards for like literary novels and things like that. But there is definitely a change in people's viewing habits. People are less constrained by older concepts of genre and things like that.
I mean, I don't know, the 2010s era of British sci-fi stuff did eventually trail off, so I don't know if there is an infinite audience for this sort of thing, but yeah, I enjoyed this one. Would watch a second season. I still think they could tighten up the plotting and make it even better, but, that's what second seasons are for. Now you got all the introductions out of the way.
Yeah, I definitely watched the second season. I thought this was fun. Yeah, it's gone into my top shows of the year list, so we'll see where it's sitting by the end of the year. But it is, I definitely would strongly recommend this. Lots of fun. Bizarrely, like, weaves in actual like stuff from the period, like actual political intrigue involving Jacobites, the Young Pretender, Queen Anne's position on the throne being sort of tentative. So yeah, there was actually quite a lot of historical accuracy for this fantasy show.
Yeah, but serious business.
Serious business. Yeah, and historic Tottenham.
For some reason, in a weird way, I enjoyed the scene where they have their meeting with the Queen and then have to go on a long carriage journey to get to Tottenham through the countryside, back in the old days.
Yep, it was a village. And there's the references to local things. There's the Broadwater Manor is where the finale takes place, which is now where the Broadwater Farm housing estate is.
I'm glad they've done their homework.
Yeah, they have me, and the church is a real church. And one of the things I liked about this is it's, as well as being, as we said, like a post-Doctor Who, a post-Buffy sci-fi show, fantasy show. Yeah, it's also a post-Bridgerton a period drama in that they've gone for the sort of race-blind casting. People of sort of like any skin tone turn up in almost like any role, which I quite like. You know, it's a fantasy show. It's not aiming at historical accuracy. There were no magic-powered highway women in the time, so like, you know, why not just cast anyone of any race in like any role? Yeah, I quite like that. They also weaved in that one of the main characters, was from Benin and had been sort of like bought as a slave and then become part of this aristocratic family, which is a thing that actually happened, and kind of, interesting they wove that into the show. I do feel on some level that it kind of didn't work with the rest of the race-blind casting. I feel that if you're going to go out of the way to explain why one character is black in a period drama, when most people would have been white in Tottenham or in London, but then also race blind the rest of the cast, so you have any race turning up in any role. I feel that like you should kind of do one or the other. Either just be like, it's a fantasy show, why not race blind cast the whole thing, or have a historically accurate reason for someone's skin color. It's like kind of one or the other maybe, but it's not really a big criticism. And I do like that, the kind of post-Bridgerton race-blind casting era does mean that you get people like Adrian Lester turning up doing a great villain in this and things like that. So there's lots to be said in its favour.
Yeah, I don't know enough about history to comment either way, but I did enjoy those actors. And yes, that storyline was interesting. It was quite a sort of light storyline. It's one of these things that sounds like it's set up for a possible second season.
Yeah, that's a good point as well, considering it was addressed in the final episode.
Well, it was, I didn't fully realise that character's real name was meant to be a big mystery until it was lampshaded in the previously on. I was like, oh, that matters, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a kind of a character point for that character when he was introduced early on. As a kind of, there's a bit of backstory to this character, and like, it'll become plot relevant. It all sort of linked up in the end. It did a quite good job of drawing all of its various plot threads together into one big action scene at the end involving magic and fighting and stuff. Again, higher concept than these British shows tend to go in for, but it was pretty good.
Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much, as ever, for listening. If you have enjoyed this broadcast, then why not go to moderatefantasyviolence.com and enjoy all the other ones, plus our various articles and, of course, our amazing purple web design. And if you've really, really enjoyed it, then please go to your podcatcher of choice and leave us a nice review. Thank you very much. 5 stars, please.
You can also find more from us on either Facebook, Twitter, or Blue Sky by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can get more from me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram by searching for Alistair Ball. You can also find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com or my theatre reviews at Everything Theatre.
And you can get more from me at nickbryan.com on the wider internet, or if you search for Nick Bryan, Bryan with a Y, on most social medias, my little red angry cartoon avatar should pop up. We're currently revving up for my next Kickstarter launch, so get on board, click the little pre-order link, make the number go up and improve my fragile self-esteem. Or come back next fortnight for the next episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, in which we'll be covering the current critically acclaimed streaming series Shogun and the critically acclaimed movie from last year, Bottoms. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much.